So the emperor wasn't just going around saying, I'm the guy in charge of the country. He was saying, I'm the Son of God. And the Pharisees holding these coins were holding coins saying, the emperor is the Son of God. Now, was that good or bad? Was the emperor the Son of God? No. The Pharisees were the Jews who were most concerned with following the rules. The people most concerned with being faithful to God, with not turning away, with not doing anything that would bring them into anything that would turn them away from God. They wanted to be totally focused on God. And here they are holding this coin saying the emperor is the Son of God, which is bad, bad, bad. It's just not the worst thing you could do would be to do something to help people worship a human being, right? Think about it. They're holding these coins that say, go worship this guy. Not good. So what Jesus is saying when he says, render unto Caesar, if you think about the comparison to Nazis, it's almost like he's saying, give it back to Hitler. You know, kind of the same tone. That's the kind of tone you have. Or even worse than that, there's a religious side to that. You could even say it came from Satan, give it back to Satan. And that's why the Pharisees don't answer. Because what Jesus is saying to them isn't, well, you need to give the government their share. He's saying you shouldn't be messing around with this stuff in the first place. Even have the coin in your hand shows you've already sold out. You've already traded your righteousness and your belief in being holy because you want to have the emperor's money because it's the only money around. You know, I read a thing a couple of years ago from an anti-tax person. It was like people who they thought that paying taxes was wrong because the government did bad stuff. They didn't want to support it. And they said, we have the perfect plan so that you'll never have to pay taxes again. And it's 100% legal. And anybody can do it. And it's simple. You know what it was? Don't make any money. But they were serious. They put out the plan. They said, if you make less than this amount of money, $8,000, I think, you don't have to pay taxes. Here's how to live on $8,000 so you don't have to support the government anymore. That puts tax day into perspective where they were Christians. I mean, this was from a Christian viewpoint. That kind of put it into perspective for me. You know, before we get too worked up about these things, we're getting it from somewhere. And it's a little more complicated for us because our money doesn't tell us to go worship a God. What does our money say? In God we trust. Okay, well, that must make our money Christian then, right? It gets a little tricky. God is not Jesus. And despite all of the talk about the Christian nation that goes around, we weren't founded to be a Christian nation. We were founded maybe to be a nation that had some kind of generic belief in God. But that's not the same thing. And it's much easier for us to confuse being a good person in our country with being a good Christian. You know, Jesus, in a way, Jesus had it easy. It was black and white, wasn't it? Over here is the Roman Empire, which was basically anti-God, like flat out, openly trying to get people to stop worshiping God. And over here you have what's right. Made it real easy to make a choice. You got black, and you got white. We're kind of in a little bit more of a gray situation. You know, our church just received a renewal for our government grant. Now we can't demand that people worship Jesus in order to get the grant, but we can talk to them about Jesus while we're helping them. You know, that's within the bounds. There's some rules, but yet it's a little bit more complicated. And for us as individuals, it's a little bit harder to figure out. You can't just say the church and the world. It's gray. And those grays make it much harder for us to live. as good Christians. Because even though we talk about grace, we got some black and white things. You know what this is? You can't see it up there, but we'll have to put on a slideshow somehow. That's the dome of the Capitol building. Do you see what's there? If you go to the U.S. Capitol, and you know they've got a dome, much bigger than ours, and you look up and this is the painting you see, with the angels and all that. And can you tell who that is? It's George Washington. Can you go back to the previous slide? Yep, there's heaven. There's the clouds of heaven and the angels all around. And there's a throne up in heaven. And there's George Washington sitting on his throne, looking down at us from heaven. I think that kind of sums up where we are. There's Christian-y stuff, but there's some stuff in there that's maybe not so Christian-y. It's hard to know where the line is between God we trust and, hey George, up in heaven, you know, thanks for keeping an eye on us and running our country for us. You know, it's hard. And it makes being a Christian in our country harder than we think. It's harder than we think because we might think it's easy. You know, if you live in a place, anytime the church is in a country where the government is trying to stamp it out, the church grows like crazy. Because you have to make a decision. If you're in a country where being a Christian means that you could get killed, every single person who becomes a Christian is going to have to think about it really carefully. It's going to be a life or death situation. For us, we can kind of ease into it. We can kind of slide in. We can kind of do it in little baby steps. That makes it harder in a way, because then we might not know the difference between Jesus and George Washington